Online here. Okay, it being 7:33 more or less, we'll call this meeting to order. The Board of Zoning Planning and Appeals for Thursday, January 25th. Roll call, Mr. Simmons, please.
Mr. Williams? Present. Pippin? Graziano?
Here.
O'Laughlin?
Here.
Kretschmer? Here. Jasper? Corey?
Okay. Following protocol, if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, were you going to contact Mr. Corey?
He was going to call in, so.
He was going to call in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does he have the right number?
He does. I will text him right. But we can start anytime.
I suppose we could get started anyway. Our meeting tonight is a workshop on the Unified Development Ordinance that we've had a couple of previous meetings on. And Mr. Simmons, are you starting or are we jumping right in?
I'll tee it up really quickly. Just as you mentioned, we've had a few discussions on this to date. Basically, this is the first opportunity that you've had to see actual text being drafted. So our consultant, Hauser Levine Associates, will go through some of the changes that are proposed. Welcome any feedback you have. If there's additional feedback that you have after review this evening, you can still funnel that through me. I'd be more than happy to pass it along to consultant to make sure that we are on the right path moving forward here. But this is, again, the first draft that we've seen at this level. Welcome any feedback you have, and I'll turn it over to John and his staff to go into the changes, and we can walk through from there.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. All right, thanks for having us back again. You've met me before several times. With me is Jackie Wells. Jackie's a planner in our office who's going to be working with me on this. So every time we have a meeting here on forward, it'll likely be both of us here so we can hear your comments directly. I wanted to just draw attention to the first thing I want to go through. This, when you get to this type of zoning where you're reviewing text, I told Brian these meetings are either really fast or you get into the weeds and they last for forever. So, gentlemen, it's on you.
Hey, Pat.
Hi, Brian.
All right. We're running and going.
Okay, sorry, I'm just here in the airport, and I can hear you, so can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, thank you very much, guys. I'm going to have you on mute, and I'll come off mute if I have questions.
Perfect.
Okay, sounds good.
Glad you could join us.
Thank you very much.
So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is just the zoning districts text. You should have gotten a couple of hard copies. We have it on the screen as well that we can pull through. Last time, this is what I presented, the majority of the time last time. We went through section by section. We had red line version, so everything was redlined that had been changed. I had comments off to the side that explained why we made all the changes. We sort of went through and had a long discussion about the zoning district section. So what you see before you is we picked up on a couple of the comments that you had, a couple that Brian had. So this is probably a 99% or more draft of the zoning district standards for all the different zoning districts, A through L, reflecting what we presented last time and any changes that came out of the discussion we had last time. Again, this goes to district characteristics and purpose, the boundaries, dimensional standards for the parcels, use standards, and district development standards in terms of height, setback, and the like. So rather than read through the whole thing, if you want to take a look at it, I'll scroll through it. And if anything you want to ask me about, go ahead.
And this was just basically the last time we went through all of this, and this is just the edits that we all came up with. Okay.
So last time I went through it, it probably took a couple of hours to walk through every step, everything that was redlined. There were a couple of call-outs that we wanted to circle back on with Brian. We've got most of those addresses, one or two we might want to take a look at still, but like I said, this is a 99% there based on discussion. So again, establishing all the districts, A couple of key highlights, we created a new residential district. We got rid of a couple of residential districts, and we collapsed the 4 PO districts into 1 PO district. So that is sort of some of the changes that we made to the different districts. When you get into again, the zoning district changes, we added 1 new residential district and collapsed all the PO districts into 1 new one. The dimensional standards on this table, you'll see anything in red is a new standard that we have, either in terms of lot coverage, height, lot area, or setback. And then some of the changes here are not to the standards only, but to the footnotes below the standards. If there is a unique situation, like is the district adjacent to a residential district, the standards then are slightly different. There are standards here regarding porous paving material or permeable brick pavers.
Yeah, that was where I was going to stop, right there. Hey, Brian, didn't we decide we were going to go with more than 20%?
That's for a credit for the
On
20.
the credit?
Right, I thought the credit was going to be bigger than 20%.
We changed so the lot coverage for the actual zoning districts, we were increasing.
Oh, we're increasing there, so this is, okay, all right. As long as we're getting an increase somewhere with the permeable.
Correct. So if you look at the R2 and the R2A districts in the bulk table, those two, the minimum or maximum lot coverage is going up to 45% in both those districts.
Okay, so then,
they-
all right, I'll.
So we
I'll
bumped
let you
that
the
up,
20.
right?
Yeah.
And that was in part because if you're looking at the variation requests and other things for the standards, it just made sense to bump that number up. So.
No, I was just, I mean,
So the way,
he's into my industry here, and I am well aware that the studies show it's well over 20%.
Right.
It's more like 80% pervious.
sure. And this is more for credit for how much of the lot can be developed. So
Okay.
they can go up to 45%
Right.
by right.
And then with a
our
20%
surfaces,
credit.
And then 20% credit if they use those materials
The
for
permeable
certain
pavers
areas.
or
Yeah.
whatever.
So in total, you could possibly have 50% lot coverage on a site or
Right.
more, depending what type of materials, what areas are utilized.
And
for
then you're
pavers.
not bad, yeah, because then you're not basically paving your whole.
Right.
Yeah.
Correct.
So you
Okay.
can go 20% above that 45% limit depending on the material. So it's pretty generous. And
You
so
up
again,
for nitty picky
Yeah.
things?
You bet.
Just get my mind straight.
Sure.
Just on the Park and Open Space District, Brian can probably tell me, is it the Village of Cary Park District or just the Cary Park District?
It would be any properties that would be.
No, I mean just the name.
The wording of it,
Cary
I'm sorry.
Park.
I think it should be maintained by the village or Cary Park District. Or Village of Cary and Cary Park District.
Yeah, I would-
They're not the same entities.
My recommendation would be it would be park and open space, so it's not just the Cary Park District or the village property. It could also be McHenry County Conservation District property, could apply to
Okay.
that as well. So
But
that-
you're talking about, he's talking about, I think.
The definition.
Not the name, but the beginning of the second line and the first sentence.
Well, both
Sure.
actually.
Maintained by the Village of Cary Park District? You just want to have that
Both
just
ways, just as we were saying here, that this seems to read that it's only Park District property, what I call Cary Park District, not Village of Cary Park District. But it would seem that that could apply to
Sure.
other pieces also.
Plus, the
Which
village,
is-
the village is about to own a very large piece of park, so
Right.
you want to
Okay.
make
That's
that,
right.
you want to make that a little bit more broad than just Village of Cary Park
Yeah, it
District,
could be Village of Cary, Cary Park District, or,
other entities.
other responsible
entities,
entities or
yeah.
something like
Yeah.
that. Okay, good.
Okay,
catch.
I'm not done yet.
No, that's good, that's good.
Okay, what's an exterior side setback and an interior side back? I think I know, I can understand exterior, but if I'm in the third lot in from the corner, have I got two
Two
interiors?
interiors, yes.
Okay, that's.
So the
kinda-
exterior is if you're on the roadside.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some
Okay.
codes will call it front and a secondary front or something like that.
Okay, and last question, in the use table, many of the uses have little asterisks after them, and I don't see a explanation for the asterisks
What page
at
are
the
you
bottom
on?
of the, in the table on page 5, I guess it is.
Where did you get the X? Oh, out on the use, I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
was looking at the
educational
conditions. Yeah.
uses, vocational schools, religious, there's like half of them have asterisks and I don't know why.
And the asterisk, oh, now you got me doing that. The asterisks that are shown are not on things we changed, but are things in the existing code. So I have to go back and double check what that asterisk is in your existing code. Brian, do you happen to know offhand what those are for?
I don't recall it.
Okay.
There's certain land uses it does reference, but
I'll have to double check, I don't know.
Okay, I was looking for the explanation at the end of the table and I couldn't find one.
Now I'm looking for it.
Okay, I'm done.
Well, let me see, we have the existing code loaded up here. Let me,
Yeah, wait a minute. I'll just say I got it here with me.
do you?
Oh, shoot, no, no.
I got an old copy.
Yeah, I had an old copy, but I had a copy in here, I thought. Must be in my other bag.
Indicates that some uses in this category may be exempt from local zoning control under state or federal law.
So education, religion,
There you go.
Okay. I guess I should have looked back in the existing,
No, but if that's here, and that's very true, we need to make sure that that carries over to the new code. So
it's all the way at the end of the table.
that's a good catch.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you remember, we reduced your table from like 24 pages to 6. I won't scroll through all of it. I'll spare you the agony. So again, you can take your time to look through this, but it should be, what you see in here in terms of changes should be reflective of things that we've already
yeah.
talked about at length. And when people think of zoning, like I said last time, this is 90% of what people think of.
Right.
What can I do? Brian, do you have a cord for this? Because it looks like you got about
You have about
7%
7% battery,
about
dude.
5 minutes left of battery life.
It's a short meeting.
I was just going to say, it may be
Better talk quick, man.
worlds short of, don't ask me to do that because it's, I can get going fast. Just not pushing it all the way. Look at that. All right, so if you find any questions on this going forward, just let Brian know, but it should be pretty straightforward. The biggest changes were, we really modified your use table to clean it up. Again, we,
Because I remember you like condensed it quite a bit.
oh, quite, I mean, the use table alone was, I think it was over 200 different ones. We got it down to about half of that.
Yeah.
So, we reduced the size of this considerably. And again, in the aggregate, we ended up eliminating residential district, creating a new residential district, and collapsing your parks districts into one. There were 4 separate ones. So,
just a quick question.
shoot.
I was looking, it says breweries and distilleries for industrial uses. A lot of places are doing, restaurants are brewing, like I think Carrie Ale House is doing
Microbrews
it.
and
So,
they're their own brew place
Right.
inside.
so how does that work within, is that building then like zoned differently if it's literally right next door? Like
No, let me see if I can find where that,
second to last, it's after wholesale in the back. Next page after that.
taverns and brew pubs?
Did I
The
not-
breweries and is under industrial uses. So
Oh, here
we're
we go,
allowing
yeah.
breweries and distilleries in the manufacturing districts.
Right.
And then the Ale House is a restaurant that's downtown, and that they are now adding to their operation the brewing component.
Okay.
But their operation first is the restaurant
Right.
component, so that's where we would classify them as a restaurant
Right.
in the downtown area, and then that brewery would be an accessory or
Okay.
separate component of it.
Okay.
And does that come down to, Brian, that the main usage, and it's only a minor use, because it's not a full like Budweiser factory.
Correct.
It's
That
just
would be
a
an
mini
industrial,
brewery
right.
place.
Correct, yeah, and I mean, they are now expanding to provide brewing options there. They're
Right.
expanding the space next, where the restaurant has been.
Yeah.
So they will be brewing in that facility, but the restaurant is the primary use for the site.
Okay, so
And
that's that.
Right.
Go up to the previous page under eating and drinking establishments, you'll see taverns and brew pubs.
Okay.
Oh, brew pubs, okay,
Yeah.
So
so
you'll
then
see
we are
a brew
good.
pub versus a brewery and a distillery. Those are pretty intense operations.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's a
if
big
it's a brew
difference.
pub or something like that, that's fine, but that's sort of an industrial application.
Yep.
Hey, Brian, just one quick question on this, because I'm looking at one here. I hate to bring it up because we all giggle, but we have medical cannabis dispensary and medical cannabis cultivation. If we're headed down the same road as Colorado, do we want to add in there not just medical, but recreational dispensary?
It would only be if the state were to pass the laws that would allow.
Then we
that
would
type of
add
use.
it in?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Then you
So-
do a city-initiated text amendment and change
Correct.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I have a question on the education
Sure.
section here. You know, with the asterisks we're talking about being, making it exempt from the regulations. It's my understanding after that whole fiasco over Crystal Lake South, the bleachers, that the state has passed, like the legislature has passed something that education actually has to follow the zoning or go through a zoning process. So it wouldn't be exempt anymore?
Well, and I'd want to go back and double check the existing code versus what it should be going forward. I don't think that it meant it's exempt from all local. It just means there may be a component, a federal requirement, there may be a piece of it that's exempt from it. I don't know if it means that schools are exempt from local jurisdiction. It may be some aspect of education the federal government mandates they do to be eligible for federal funds. So there may be a piece of it, the school might say, listen, we have to do this, federal government requires this piece. You wouldn't be able to locally say you can't, because there's federal funds involved. So I don't think it means that the school, if the school was just exempt, it would be a statement in there, schools are exempt from local, whatever. This, I think the asterisk, if you could read it off again, in the existing code,
Who's education?
Here?
at the end of the table, what did it say?
Oh, educational uses, okay, I got you.
Some of
There's
these
nothing
uses
on
are
it.
exempt by federal or state laws.
Yeah. So some of them might be, it doesn't mean they all are, and there may be just a component of it. So I think we're okay, but if we want to tighten up that language, we might.
Yeah, because I think it just came out last year after all the lawsuits, everything about the bleachers.
Right. Well, and I can remember a lawsuit maybe going back about 18 years. I can't remember if it was Northbrook or Wilmette, where the Park District was suing over some reader board sign that the village said you couldn't do because they didn't allow it. And they said, you have no legal authority through zoning or sign codes over us. We're another taxing body. That was a big hoo-ha as well. So there may be pieces of those things you can't regulate, but as institutions, if they came in for a building addition or whatever, you'd be able to regulate that.
Okay.
Wasn't there a time that the Park District thought they didn't have to talk to us too?
Yeah, there was. I think they still do sometimes. No,
Well, it is funny to me that a lot of residents and communities all over the country, they, unless they follow local happenings, they think park districts and cities and school districts all just get along.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
a lot of communities, people think that. man.
I have yet to see a community where all three get along.
Yeah, it's right. Well, park districts are kind of a unique thing to Illinois.
Yeah.
In other cities and other states, it's just a parks department of the city.
Yeah.
Being its own taxing body is unique to Illinois. Not every place in Illinois has it.
Well, no, because Chicago, Chicago
Oh.
Park District is part of the city, right?
Yeah, well, and a lot of cities, even in Illinois, it's the Parks Department, and it's just
Yeah.
a department of
Yeah.
the city, but in other states, parks districts don't exist.
It's just part of the city.
There's one quick comment to add for the use table. We are proposing, or one of the proposals for the zoning districts to be consolidated was to eliminate the BP district.
Right.
Right.
So a lot of those uses would, that are properties that are currently zoned BP would go to M. The use table does, I just noticed, still shows the BP district listed there. But that column would go away as part of that elimination.
So,
Oh, and the use tables, I'm sorry,
Correct, yeah.
right.
so when we look at something like a health, athletic, recreational, and amusement park facility, and it's an X in the BP, but a conditional in the M, what do we end up doing then?
It
We
would
make it
be
conditional
conditional in the
overall?
M. Yeah, it'd be conditional in the M, so.
Gotcha. So whatever it is in the M is what it will become when BP
Correct.
moves over.
Correct.
Okay.
Then from, zoning district wise, the BP district, we have very few properties that are actually zoned BP.
Yeah. No,
Right.
it's-
It's Stryker's building, the post office and a couple of properties right around that, this campus where the Village Hall and Park District facility are located at, and the parcel along Route 31. And that's the entire scope of what we have in town, but they're all right next to manufacturing, or in this case, surrounded by residential, so this
Right.
would be rezoned to something more appropriate for this area.
Okay, gotcha.
All right. All right, so that's everything in this. Again, if you have any other questions with this, and if we make any wholesale changes to this, we'll bring them back up at a later meeting. But I think other than a couple of little minor tweaks or corrections, this is substantially, again, like 98% what it's going to be going forward. So, all right. So the other section that we took a look at was development standards. And if you look at your existing code, let's see if I can pull this section up on you. So I'm going to move the existing code on your screen. And again, design standards goes to things like landscaping, parking lots, primarily things like that. So if you take a look at this, you'll see, I'll go down to the section that did the most changes was the landscaping section in your ordinance is pretty cumbersome. So again, we took the species table and moved it, but again, this is, and not to call attention to you guys, but I actually do use these graphics in other communities to show planning graphics. We, in your landscaping standard, this is one of the most arduous sections of your code is the landscaping requirements. It's really a complicated thing to get to. So, and this one's going to be sort of tough to present. So if you're looking now at the development standards section, and again, as opposed to this section, it's pretty thin, but pretty important because this applies to what your zoning is for your parcel.
Right.
And this governs what you can build, what your lot dimensions have to be, and the uses that are allowed. And that's all in this section. This section, development standards, or sometimes the codes are called standards of general applicability. And this is like, if you have a parking lot, your parking lot standards are in here. It doesn't matter what district you're in. If you have landscaping requirements around a parking lot or a building or screening, doesn't matter what district you're in, they're governed by this, or general standards, or standards, design standards across the full spectrum. So I'll walk you through some of this right now, if you want to look at the hard copy of this. Some of this stuff is pretty straightforward and didn't change because the language was very sort of matter of fact. But I want to call your attention to the section that talks about landscape, because the biggest changes we wanted to go over tonight or to get your feedback on was landscaping and parking, because it's the majority of this. So if you look at 4D landscape, we basically rewrote a whole new section for you guys, because it's sometimes, rather than going and tweak what's there, it's better just to replace it. And this was that time. So we went and researched a number of other codes, looked at other ones that we had written, looked at what we're trying to accomplish here, still being true to the idea of these are different land use intensities, residential, industrial, commercial, and then keeping true to your ordinance from before and having different varying degrees of landscaping between those uses going forward. So it's worked for you in the past, it was complicated, we tried to make it better, but in keeping with that same thing. So if you look through here, and again, I don't really know how to even present this because it's all new. It's not like I can point out where we've made changes because the whole thing is different. So this whole section is completely different, because if you go in starting on page 18 of your draft, you'll see where it says design standards landscaping with the line struck through it. Bottom part of page 18. Well, you can see there the next several pages are all struck through because we replaced them all. And what we replaced them with are the pages in front that are in blue underlined.
Okay.
So I'll kind of walk through just real quickly here what we've done. So the intent of the standards, we wanted to put sure that was there. Preservation of plan submittal requirements. And if you remember last time, there was requirements talking about if you were 6 inches in caliber, 12 inches in caliber, you had to have a plan. And we replaced that with your suggestion, which was they had to come in with a plan, a tree replacement plan or preservation plan. They had to be approved by Brian or his designee. as opposed to trying to do it all in here because it was just too cumbersome. So again, general landscape requirements then on page 9. If you get into that, plant material selection, types of plants and materials, shade tree, screening trees, turf, lawn grasses, shrubs. We wanted to define what those were because the requirements for screening on plant installation go back to those types of definitions. Now, we always say that, and we've said from the beginning, generally speaking, you want your definitions in one section, all right? But when it comes to usually a landscape code, because it's so specific, we have those definitions embedded in this section.
Gotcha.
As opposed to the rest of the code where if you're trying to find out what do they mean by a clothesline, you look in definitions. What do they mean by a special permit, you look in the definition section. But here we're talking specifically about sort of a menu approach to landscaping, so those menu type definitions need to be in the section. So this section is a little bit unique with regard to definitions. So again, it's a hard one to go through. We go through parking lot landscaping. We talk about minimum size of trees, planting of trees, how far apart they have to be, planting that has to be at a foundation of a building, planting that has to be at a parking lot, both the interior islands as well as the perimeter around the parking lot. We designate all of this. We talk about ground cover, transition areas between different uses and use types. And we identify the number of feet, the minimum fence height or tree height, the number of trees, the minimum number of shrubs per 100 square feet. We try to get as specific as possible. Now, someone can exceed these and really diversify the plant material so they can really make it customized to their site. But we wanted to make sure that parking lots were attractive. It's not an overly onerous code. So no developer is going to come and look at this and say, oh, you're killing me. I can't burden the cost of this much landscaping. That's not at all the case. But we want to make sure that incompatible uses that are adjacent to one another are properly screened and buffered. We want to make sure that buildings are attractive and sites are attractive. And we want to make sure that parking lots, both interior and exterior perimeter, are attractive and appropriate. So we have land use designation for each one of those types of applications. Parking lot, interior, exterior, and perimeter, building foundation, site landscaping, and then buffer screening landscaping between properties and uses. Those are sort of the key buckets of landscaping. And other than being able to sort of answer questions that you might have, again, screening of trash on receptacle areas, different screening requirements, outdoor storage and display. This is crucial for your industrial areas. We're not going to have pretty strict screening requirements for outdoor storage areas, more so than what you had in the past. Screening for ground-mounted mechanical units, screening for roof-mounted mechanical units. Now, we're not talking about planting shrubs on your roof. Loading docks, service yards, drive-through facilities, all screening and landscaping for every type of on-site development application is in this section now. And it should be really straightforward. So it's replacing what was a really hard to follow code, which what we think is a much more contemporary standard and much easier to follow. So I guess, I know you seeing this in hard copy, it's sort of tough to get your head around it. And one of the things that's going to be coming is we're replacing your graphics that are on the screen with graphics that are sort of photorealistic, if you will. So I know those are, you're going to miss those.
Our stick trees?
The ones you're going to go on the street. But we want to give a better, both a plan view and a perspective view as to what landscaping between adjacent uses look like, what appropriate parking screening looks like around the perimeter of parking lots, to begin to show if you have the public sidewalk and in a parking lot, what can you do within 3 feet, 5 feet, 8 feet, both between landscaping and fencing, and we'll illustrate all of that.
Okay.
So there will be, and then when it's referenced in the code, they'll say, see figure 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and it'll be an illustrative example of what is codified in the text. So they can see exactly what we're talking about. And I think that's going to help a lot.
Now, we'll just interject too, in this point for the, section 1730.067, which is, basically the classification of uses that we have in the code now. That's one of the most difficult tables for staff to interpret and determine what type of landscape buffer is required. It's on page 21 of the text that you have.
Where are you at?
Page 21.
So that's just the text that we're striking out, but basically the way it worked before is that if you had a land use that was proposed, say it was a residential use, that would be a class 1, but it would refer back to the actual land use table. So you had to find the use in the land use table, come back to this table, figure out what class of use it is.
Oh, so you're doing too much
You're, yeah,
cross-reference.
doing multiple cross-referencing. The code right now jumps all over the place.
Yeah,
from
well, we know that,
perspective.
yeah.
Right.
So this kind of puts it all right here where
Yeah, it's-
you and your staff can read it and know exactly what you
It
need.
essentially replaces on page 16, you have the one table that now shows what your subject land use is.
Yep.
And what your adjacent land use is, and all in that one table, you can determine if it's a detached single family next to an industrial use or industrial next to detached single family, what type of transition area would be necessary or required, and then just go to that one table to figure out what the requirements are for that transition.
It's real straightforward.
that's
Before
nice.
it was complicated. And again, we have several different models of codes, and a lot of them don't have this. They just say like, here's the buffering requirements for landscaping. It didn't matter what the adjacent uses were, it just said, here's what it was. But we know there was sort of a comfort level in sort of saying, what's the intensity of use? And defining appropriately the landscaping between those two, depending on intensity of use. That's what it was here before. And although it was incredibly complicated to get to administer for staff and for the applicant, the idea of that concept worked here. So we found one that was a real clean version of that. So real easy to follow, both for the applicant and for staff. So
Good.
we thought it was a much better way to go. So again, I know that's not the greatest presentation, but when you have 14 pages of new landscaping ordinance text, other than read it off to you, you just got to sort of understand what it is, how it was structured and why, and then go through it when you can and ask any questions of us or Brian going forward when you find something you don't understand.
Yeah.
When you see the graphics, it'll become much more illustrated as to, and when I presented in front of you guys, I don't know if it was last time or the time before that, the first time, we showed you examples of what that landscaping would look like from another code. And it almost looked like a design, I mean, it's really attractive. It almost looked like it came out of a landscape architecture manual. It'll be a really nice graphic. So next time you see this, it'll have the graphic support to illustrate these concepts of foundation, landscaping, buffering, screening, parking lot. It'll all be illustrated. So.
Perfect.
So, and then number of buildings on a lot, nothing changed there. That's pretty straightforward. That's 4E on page 25. But then we get into off-street parking and loading beginning on page 26. And this is the other section that we really sort of took a run at to clean up a little bit. So if you go then to page 34, again, this is another one that we just didn't tweak. So if you look at page 34, 35, 36, 37, all the way through to 40,
Wow.
57,
Yeah, you
we
get
just
struck
struck
on
out. All right? So we didn't monkey around with tweaking it. We just got rid of 20 pages of your old text and rewrote a parking code section. So again, I'll go through the off-street parking and loading that we proposed, again, starting on page 26. So parking has changed a little bit over time. There's a science to parking, but it's not complicated, I guess, for the most part. So we talk in here, let's get started. So parking spaces required. General provisions, that's pretty straightforward. But if you look at on page 27 at the top, it says parking spaces required. We talk about residential and non-residential uses. We talk about the dimension standards. If you go to page 28, we're not changing your previous dimension standards. They work well and are fine. We talk about access and driveways. That all works. The next change that we talk about is, let me go to it, required off-street spaces. Is on page 31, where we begin to get into how we've broken out the different parking standards. And this whole table is new. But from the residential to the recreational, to the commercial, to all the way through by use type. And then we talk about specifically what the use is within that category, and then how many parking spaces are required for that. So again, the table is really straightforward. It goes through the residential, recreational, commercial, industrial, and transportation and utility, and talks about what the requirements are for these each. Again, it's real straightforward. So we replaced 20 some odd pages of parking and got it down to just a handful of pages.
Hey, Brian, one quick question for you. At the very beginning on page 27 of the parking spaces required, we said the total number of required parking and loading spaces shall be based upon the requirements of the principal use of the lot. However, when more than one use occupies the same lot, the number of required spaces shall be the sum of the separate requirements for each use.
Sure.
Right?
I want to say that in my past here, we've allowed less parking in some spots because they had a giant parking lot next to them.
Yeah, this is speaking more toward if you're looking like a mixed-use building, they have a commercial space on the ground floor and potentially residential above.
Okay, so it's
you
more in that
you
lines?
can
Okay. Okay.
Combine those together. From a shopping center standpoint, if you have multiple uses in that center, overall, the shopping center should have a certain amount of parking that it provides for itself, that each use might have, a restaurant might have.
Yeah, because
20
we've allotted,
spaces.
I think the last one was Starbucks. We allotted them because there was parking in where Ace sits, basically.
Correct. And one area that I've mentioned that the John and his staff is looking at the commercial land use, and if you have, they've added a category for shopping center.
Right?
So if it's over a certain square footage, there's just one number that's required for that shopping
For the
center.
whole thing?
Right.
Not each individual user.
Okay, so that's where we'll break it out from there.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So-
that's a good catch, because Brian brought that to our attention last week. In which one?
The very last retail and service.
We tried to have that in here, and that and downtown before we got to this meeting.
I'm sorry, page 30.
Page 30.
Yeah, I just was reading the one part and I didn't go to the actual.
Shopping center in excess of 120,000 square feet, one for 250 gross floor
Oh,
area.
perfect. Excellent. Thank you.
And now what we did there is Brian mentioned a couple different shopping centers. We took a look at the square footage of those. And the reason being, if you had, a couple of personal service uses, a couple of retail uses, a couple of restaurant uses, that tenant mix may whatever else. But you know that if you're going there to get your nails done, you may run over to get something to eat, you may do some shopping. If every one of those uses had to meet the minimum requirement for square footage for that individual use, the shopping for that center as a whole would be much bigger than it needed to be.
That's why I was questioning the first paragraph because
You're
it just
exactly
didn't sound like a jive between
Right.
the two. So, okay.
So Brian brought that to our attention. We looked at the two shopping centers he referenced and used those as the benchmark to hit that number that is identified on here of 120,000 square feet.
So in that case, multiple uses, the shopping center, it's not two uses like you were
Correct.
saying.
Yeah,
A restaurant below and a couple apartments below.
Yeah, I mean, for this shopping center, it's looking at like Cary Square where Jewel is located at.
Right.
We have that sea of parking that's in front of it. There's multiple buildings that are there.
Right.
But if a restaurant wanted to go into where the Hallmark used to be, they wouldn't have to provide additional parking or come in for a variance.
Because
if
they'd be
comply
part of the
with
whole
this.
shopping
Correct.
center.
Correct.
And you have, different peak periods so if it's a sit-down restaurant versus, a Subway that's there now, their peak might be more in the evening versus a lunch hour
Lunchtime.
or Subway. So you'd have that, sharing of, parking spaces that are there that aren't all at the same time being utilized.
Okay.
And the threshold of that number is crucial because you wouldn't want like a small strip center that had three small tenants to be afforded the same sort of thing as the big shopping center because they need to provide individual uses for those things. You're not hitting that critical mass of a sea of parking.
Right. That's where my question came
Right.
in.
So you're spot on and exactly thinking what Brian was last week and he called us up.
Okay, perfect.
The other one that you had mentioned last week, Brian, was the downtown, correct? And we addressed that where?
It's below the table in a short paragraph.
Okay. So the requirements in the table above do not apply to uses located on the first floor in the District B1. Required parking for first floor uses in District B1 is at the discretion of the Community Development, Director of Community Development. Uses in the B1 district located on the second floor or above must comply with the requirements in the table listed above. So in a downtown area, it's commonplace that uses on the ground floor don't have any off-street parking requirements. Because in a traditional downtown,
They're
the
all next to
building
each other.
takes
yeah.
up 80 to 100% of the lot. So
Right.
they can't. Now, if you're going to start providing office or residential uses above, you've got to provide parking for them someplace or some way. Because otherwise you'll have people come in here building a 3 or 4 story building and saying, I don't have to provide any parking. Then if there are apartments or condos, where do those people park?
Right.
The ground floor is on street or you got to find it however way. The property owner is not required to provide parking for that ground floor use on site. Any uses they have up above, they got to provide for it or seek relief.
Gotcha.
And that's commonplace in most traditional downtowns.
Gotcha.
So we added that here at the bottom of the table.
for reference, the B1 District 2, from a boundary standpoint, is basically from Borden Avenue, right across from the railroad station where the golf cart facility is located at.
Yeah.
From there to the old Village Hall, right at the corner of 14 and Main Street. And then on the south side of the tracks, 1 block south of Main Street. So the prop network, the Orchard Prime Meats is at, but the block, beyond that.
Right, and do
basically
you go black, east and west as well? Because there's some little businesses along in there
Correct.
too.
Yeah, it goes to the east. It goes basically to the True Value property.
Right.
That's zoned M, so it basically stops at that intersection, the 3-way stop that's there.
And to the west, it's the railroad tracks, so, yeah.
No, to the west, it would be a block beyond High Road. So you have there's a series of old historical homes that first block beyond downtown.
That
So it-
kind of go in businesses on the main level type of thing.
correct. So the B1 district goes 1 block beyond High Road, which is where the signal is downtown.
Okay.
So the last piece of this section talks about performance standards, and performance standards generally most specifically apply to industrial uses. It talks about noise, vibration, smoke, impact, things like that. And so there wasn't a need to change what your current code had in place because it was reflective of what most standards are. So we didn't make changes to that section, or didn't propose any changes to that section. Because it was pretty typical, pretty standard performance standard stuff. So again, those 2 sections, landscaping and parking, the only sections we really changed in this performance standards. But because it applies across the full spectrum and all districts anywhere in the entire community, it has a huge impact. So getting those 2 standards right is key. We think that these push the envelope to ensure that you will have better looking development going forward without hitting that mark where property owners are going to balk. We just can't comply, it's too much. And there's a fine line between striking that balance, and we think this does this. With these standards, you shouldn't have anybody complaining that it's too hard to comply. And through this application, adjacent properties should be screened from anything they happen to be adjacent to, which might not be necessarily a compatible use or activity. And we think this does that in a real clean manner. So, and again, so this, unlike the district standards where we were tweaking and redlining, this one we just had to come in wholesale, wipe out sections and rewrite it and replace it. And so it's a harder way to do it for us, but it's much easier for you because it's just, you're getting a new version of what it was rather than tweaking or skirting the edges. So again, these 2 sections are sort of the heart and soul of the ordinance in terms of as it applies to property owners. A lot of the other stuff is administrative or procedural that we have to get into, and that's sort of a lot more onerous to write because it's legal and it's tweaking, it's little stuff that people only really come into contact with when they apply for a variance or a plan development or a special use or something like that. This applies to everybody all the time, regardless of whether relief is sought or not. So these 2 sections are the meat of the zoning ordinance that we wanted you guys to have in front of your hard copies.
One quick question on this, Brian, and maybe it's the wording, maybe I'm reading it wrong. I understand it's that on page 62, 1750-050 is flat out commercial and industrial performance standards, but then when you get to smoke,
Right.
number 1, in all districts other than the M district, we're saying commercial and business districts, because if somebody's got a fireplace, they're gonna have some smoke. Do you want to word that differently?
Yeah, the way this is, and that was, I think, discussion we had
Right.
a couple years ago.
Yeah.
There was one business that had a noise complaint regarding it. The entire section really speaks towards manufacturing
It's
districts.
just speaking towards the manufacturing
Right.
district?
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
So it's not a beat, there's not a noise requirement for the B2 next to a residential district. It's for manufacturing to a residential district.
Yeah, no, yeah, it was just when I saw in all districts other than M, it's like, do we want to re-clarify there? Or
Yeah.
is it just because at the top it says commercial and industrial performance, we're covered?
Yeah, I think it's, from your point, it should be just industrial performance standards.
Okay, okay.
Right. That makes sense.
That's I
Well, did we-
hate to have one neighbor go, I was reading my code, my neighbor's got a fireplace and I hate it. So let's get that stopped.
Well, that's why we say commercial and industrial, it's not residential.
No, but you go down to that in all districts other than M, and
Yeah,
somebody's gonna read
right.
that and come in here and, hey,
Right.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Is it like the commercial, we're talking about taking out commercial, well, we got into the thing about outdoor parties.
Yeah.
Right.
And, which would be in a commercial district.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right. So I think that Bryce's idea was right, make it just industrial.
Industrial,
And
yeah.
we'll be fine, yeah, it's a good catch. And it's funny, you get so close to stuff, you're thinking like, well, nobody will interpret it that way. Well, somebody exactly will. I mean, there's always going to be the person or situation you didn't anticipate, and someone comes in and applies it to that, and then you're like, well, so we got to catch that. So catching things like that helps us tighten up, and that's what we have to make sure we do.
I've been on my homeowners association for 15 years. Believe me, every rule has been challenged in front
Yeah,
of me.
right,
so.
no, you're right, right. Yeah.
And you have to say, that's not the intent of this. Well, it says.
It doesn't matter,
Okay.
yeah, and that's the difference between, like, the comprehensive plan that we worked with you guys to develop versus zoning. Zoning is what you can and cannot do with your property, and people get real cautious about that,
Yeah.
real particular, so the words matter.
Yeah,
The words
that's
matter.
all I was saying was just because it says in every section, in every other section, or in all districts other than M, I could just see somebody going, that means residential. You
Right.
can't have a chimney.
Right.
You can't have
Yeah.
a
No, I
fireplace.
see what you're
No,
saying.
I agree 100%. And I'm sure the one thing Brian does not want is people calling him up complaining that their neighbors have a log on the fire.
Yeah, exactly. And it's against section 17.
Right, right,
50.050.
And the way that reads, I mean, it refers to all districts other than the M district, but it actually speaks to our specific uses.
Yeah, I see where it says industrial uses and all that.
Correct.
It's just the way I read it.
Right.
I mean, I was reading it stupidly, and I could see many people reading it
No,
stupidly,
right.
so.
Too bad we're,
What's that?
too bad we're being
Yeah,
recorded.
you'd have a few comments, I know.
But if you think about the sections that we went over last time and tonight, sort of just to sum it up, it goes over in every district what you can do on every piece of property, what you can build on every piece of property, what uses you can have on every piece of property, what your bulk standards have to be in terms of setback, height, lot coverage, or size. That's all now governed in here very cleanly. And then those other things that have every area of the village, how you provide parking, ingress, egress, loading, access, and landscaping for parking lots, sites, buildings, and perimeter and buffer between all adjacent properties. That is now all drafted.
Oh, I mean, yeah, overall, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just one of the couple of semantic
Oh, no,
things.
this is,
that's-
I'm saying since it's recorded,
Yeah.
what we now have in total is, even if we have to make tweaks, which we have to make, that use, development, intensity, aesthetic, parking, and landscaping is now covered for all areas of the village.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's a big chunk of the code.
This is
So,
hugely cleaned up. and looks
tweaking it
great.
going forward. And what we'll do going forward is we'll start producing the clean copies and we'll put the graphics in with it. And the same thing with the, not just the landscaping, but we'll do the same thing for parking. We'll give examples of how parking is dimensioned and everything else graphically. And we will also do graphics to support height, setbacks, lot coverage. There'll be graphics to support all that as well. So I think when we get into the administrative stuff, which is more an issue to any applicant, to you and to Brian,
Right.
than it is to someone that doesn't run into zoning issues. That's the next chunk we have to get at. So with these two sections, a big lift has been lifted in terms of developing the new code.
I kind of blew past it somewhere, where, drive-ups, the stacking requirements. I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
I think there's actually, I don't know that it is in this. I think there may be standards written specifically for that. So like standards for certain things, standards for outdoor dining, standards for telecommunications, standards for drive-through facilities. There's a whole host of design type standards for certain uses that have to be developed. It's sort of a standards section that'll be developed as well. That'll be one of the next things we deliver as well.
It is you do have a draft in here on page 30 of the handout. It does require stacking spaces for drive-through facilities.
Right.
That's one comment I think I forwarded you earlier today was that I think that's reducing right now, our requirement is 6 per window,
Okay,
and this was showing a minimum of 2.
Oh, okay, that's why.
There you go.
I did notice the 2 per bay, and I wasn't sure if a bay was per drive-up window or.
right.
Yeah, it depends on the, I mean, if it's a bank, it might be 2 is sufficient for lane that you have going through it, but if it's a restaurant,
McDonald's
yeah,
type.
McDonald's, Taco Bell, have
Drive.
the 6, yeah.
Drive a bank if they only have the one window.
Which was permitted use.
So
Yeah,
we're still tweaking that.
Yeah,
I'll take one, take a look at that again, because you have banks, pharmacies, restaurants, those are the biggest users.
Car wash right now.
Yeah, and they all have
For
different,
mining.
and if you have this, I don't care what your performance centers are, if you have a Starbucks,
You don't have it.
at rush hour in the morning,
God help us, we get a
I don't care what
Portillo's
your
in there.
standards are, you're gonna blow it out of the water. A Dunkin' Donuts on a popular arterial in the morning, it's gonna blow it out of the water. And for pharmacies, they don't need to be anywhere near what they are for those types of
Yeah.
businesses. Yeah. So we will take a close look at all of that. And the other thing that I want to do, and you can see in here, insert measurement of drive-through graphic and insert stacking graphic as well. We want to see people make sure exactly what is free and clear stacking for these things. So that's a very good one, because this section needs to be beefed up. And I know every commercial developer that comes in that proposes a drive-through prays they have the problem of, oh my God, our stacking for 8 cars isn't enough during rush hour. They would love to see that. So we'll try to address that, but it may very well be by a use category, restaurant, pharmacy, and other, or something like that.
Hey, one more question, Brian. It's page 64. Air, water pollution. Air contaminated or water polluted regulated by the Illinois. Do you want to put something in there, or do we not need it? Because you're putting in there that, I mean, obviously, depending on the use, you need a state water and or air permit. But depending on the type of structure they're putting in, they may need the county stormwater permit. Do you want to add that in there? You know what I'm saying? Because remember, there's plenty of places that won't fall under a state operating permit, but they would fall under the county stormwater permit.
Aren't we under our own, aren't we,
No, we have to
We're-
follow the
we're
county.
well, that's what I'm saying.
We're a
So-
yeah.
But you're stating in here that they have to follow the Illinois state statute, which is fine, but you're not saying that you might also have to follow the county state statute.
But that's
What I'm saying is that the county statute is our statute, they gotta follow our statute anyway. But it wouldn't hurt.
I mean, yeah, but I'm just saying, in this particular paragraph, you might want to add that in there.
Yeah, I
The
think-
Kent County Stormwater Ordinance.
Understand where you're coming, you can just say the Illinois EPA, or regulated by the Illinois shall comply with applicable state and local
State and
standards.
Yeah, and local standards.
Yeah.
At local, at least, because, yeah, you don't want to say the county permit, because who knows how they'll change it over the years
Yeah.
and what they'll call it.
Right.
And whether we'll always adopt it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so we'll add that in behind the word state, we'll put and local standards. Right.
And this section is not specifically towards, stormwater management, it's water pollution.
It's pollutants.
It's
So it's-
pollutants is what it's
But
speaking
the
towards.
way the county's been gearing,
It's
you
going that
might,
Yeah,
it
Might
might get in
impact.
there.
Yeah.
It might impact it eventually. I see our county wanting a NPDES permit alongside the Illinois NPDES permit, and it's nothing better than 2 of the identical permits.
Yeah.
And one of the other sections that we're going to be working on is design standards. And the design standards talks about architectural materials, but also there was a section that talks about subdivision and land standards. Am I thinking of the wrong thing, Brian, or am I correct?
The design standard, or the architectural stuff is at the beginning of what you presented this evening, was the first,
Right. I'm talking
Sections.
about,
the subdivision ordinance.
Design standards for, yeah.
That'd be under that's Title 16, so this is a different section of our code right now.
Okay, all right. All right. All right, so again, as you go through these, if anything comes up that you think needs to be tweaked, we will tweak it. We'll add a thing about local and state standards to the pollution, and we will tweak the performance standards to make sure it's referring to industrial properties. So there's not the assumption that it's not industrial properties. And we will readdress and break out into a couple of different standards, the queuing and stacking for drive-through, along with graphics to support those standards. So that's on page 30. All right. So as you go through this, if any other issues come up, let Brian know, and we will address them right away.
Yeah, if you want more time to dive into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we present these, don't, and I know you don't, but just to reiterate, this isn't your only shot, you know, making changes. We know this is a lot of technical stuff in volume coming at you. And just because you might get it a few days before the meeting so you can at least peruse it, that doesn't mean like that's your shot. Think of these more as an orientation to what we're proposing.
I think we're all aware of
Yeah.
where our weak points were before,
right.
and, as we
Right.
get to those, it looks like you're picking up on them, and
Right. And then as we go through this, we're going to be compiling chapter by chapter. Pretty soon you'll have a new revised version of the whole thing. Sometimes it helps to see the whole thing in front of you to go through it, to call out or identify what you think might be a discrepancy or inconsistency or whatever. So we do it section by section and we're getting there. So
that's why we're paying you the big money. to
that's right.
find those things.
So I can hire people like Jackie to make sure we address everything. But we want to make sure that we keep, and even though this was only a couple of sections, they are important sections, but more than that, we wanted to keep pace with keeping this going and not, and missing a month or two in delivering, so.
I think it only took us 2 years the last time we rewrote the zoning ordinance.
Well, hopefully we'll be on pace to do it faster than that.
And it'll last longer for sure.
But we'd rather come back more often, even only to cover a little bit of material and to keep it moving, as
Well, and
opposed.
I think it makes it easier on us to only have an hour or so with you, because after a while, you start going, whoa.
It can be some mind-numbing
Yeah.
stuff, so we think, so we wanted to appear before we even go only over these couple of sections. We thought it was important.
Yep.
And what we'll probably do going forward is, when we introduce the next section as a new topic at a meeting, we will likely give you a clean version of what we covered before, like we did with the districts. We spent a lot of time going through it, and then we gave you that clean version. And next time, when we get into the next section that you haven't seen yet, we'll clean up the development standards and give you that as well, so you can sort of go back through and see it cleaned up. And to address things that we weren't addressed tonight, like tweaking the industrial standards and tweaking the drive-through stuff.
Right.
So,
Scared the hell out of me when I opened up the email and it's 65 pages. You
Yeah.
gotta be kidding me.
So, nothing's better than reading a red line version of a zoning ordinance, so. But that's why you get paid the big bucks. So, so again, incrementally, we're plowing through this. and
Oh,
what
that's
we
right, I
wanna
can't
do,
afford to
so.
watch with what they're paying me. Never mind.
So speaking of that, next steps, do you have an idea of when you might, where next meeting might be?
I'd have to go back and look at our calendar and look at your next regular meeting to see if we want to hit the next one or hit the one after that and work on more content between the next one. So we'll have to take a look and see.
Probably
what our,
like late February, early March time period.
right,
we
that's
come
exactly
back,
what
right?
I'm thinking as well, right. Right. For that next
Right.
deliverable chunk, a cleaned up version of development standards based on tonight's discussion, as well as the first shot at that red line version of the next deliverable, yeah.
Sounds good.
And before we know it, we'll have a new code,
Excellent.
all right? So, thanks for your time.
Any other business?
So moved.
That's not the question I asked.
Sorry.
Wait,
Pat's still on the phone?
I believe Pat's still there.
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
thank you very much.
Thanks,
guys.
Appreciate it.